Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Duskmos, and today I'm in my studio space, a little bit different here, to go over a new pickup I recently made, and that is the Oberheim DX. This beefy 80s drum machine has lots of mojo and character, and it's really fun to use and easy to use. And yeah, I wanted to make this video because it's got a couple issues. It's the reason why I got it for such a good deal. One is that some of the buttons double and triple trigger, which should be a pretty easy fix. And the other is that it's the non-MIDI version, which really isn't an issue, but kind of is in a modern workflow. And so we're going to take a look at what I can do to remedy both of those things. So let's check it out. Okay, so this is the Oberheim DX. Basically, you can see the kind of control scheme here. You've got the bass, snare, hi-hat, tom, cymbal, percussion, a metronome control, and a volume slider. Then here you've got all your trigger buttons. You can see that you can trigger each one of these sounds. So you can go from like loud, medium to soft on most of these, or low, mid, high. So it's either tuning or like in the hi-hats, it's accent or closed, but it's also volume. And on percussion, it's multiple sounds, claps versus shakers. These are kind of your transport and, major controls for song mode, editing, steps, copying, erasing, all that kind of good stuff. You can even adjust, obviously, a tempo, but like signature and quantize. So it's sort of kind of advanced for the time. And I think when these came out, they were like, I don't know, around like $3,000 or something. So it definitely wasn't a cheap machine, that's for sure. I'll have to fact check that. I'll put it on screen if I'm wrong. This like security/telephone keypad over here is where you navigate around, type in your tempo. So you can see here, tempo, it's on 122. So we can say we want to do like 100 and then hit tempo again. And then now we're at 100. At play, you see it's playing bar 1, bar 2, back to bar 1, but I'm on 0-0. So that's pattern 0-0. You can jump to 0-1, 0-2. If you listen on pattern 2, I've got something recorded in. It's kind of a basic pattern. Pretty cool. Go back to 0-0, hit play. We've got nothing. And you can see the tempo. I didn't lock in 100. So there, see if I hit play, you see it says it's bar 0-0, but we can go ahead and record a new one by pressing record and play. Get the metronome turned up. And we'll tap something in. Kill the metronome. And there we go, we've got a pattern in. If I want to change the tempo up, you hear it sped up. You can make it really crazy if you want. And then back to something a little bit more workable. But as you can see, it's really easy to use. It's really straightforward. These triggers, really easy to just kind of hammer something in. And one of the reasons why I really love the DX is actually because on the back, there are these tuning knobs where you can tune the pitch of basically each row. So each thing that has a slider here has a respective tuning knob on the back. You see there's quite a bit of range. But of course, I like everything tuned down. which is why these toms sound as kind of grimy as they do. But I really like that kind of, obviously, you know, if you watch my channel, you know, I like that sort of low pitch, sort of grainier, a little bit dirtier sound. And this thing sounds killer on a drive, well, with a drive pedal processing it. Really makes it nasty, which in a really good way. And ever since I first saw one of these, I just wanted one. Like, I just love how old school it is. The classic Oberheim, you know, black with the blue lines. It just screams 80s. But today isn't about a sound demo exactly. It's actually more of a project video. I got a great deal on this because there was one issue, and it's really not that bad, and I knew I could actually live with it. But as you can hear, you know, when you trigger these, most of them work pretty, you know, as you'd expect, but some of them will double trigger. And you can kind of see, if you kind of wiggle the button around, if it keeps triggering, then you know you've got a problem. And so sometimes when you're actually hammering in patterns, like that seemed to go fine. And it is okay most of the time, but I've definitely recorded in kind of like, you know, bad double triggers into patterns, and I want to fix that. There's two ways you can remedy that situation. You can either go in and disassemble and take the buttons apart. There are these springs and these wires that will corrode over time. I think this is from like 1982, 83, 84, kind of in that range. So it's been around a while, and it's had plenty of time to start to develop some corrosion. And that's exactly what's happening. So either sometimes they'll get so corroded that you can't even trigger a sound. And there are other times where it'll do exactly what this is doing and multi-trigger. So that's method number one. You just go in and fix it, and then there you go, no more problem. But I also want to modernize this a bit. And so I actually ordered the MIDI upgrade kit that includes walnut side panels that you can install with pre-installed MIDI jacks. And so if you go that route, then you can not only never touch these again if you don't want to, but you have MIDI control for syncing tempo and transport control. So like play, pause, you know, all that good stuff. But you can trigger each of the notes individually. I'm actually doing both because I want to be able to hand program, because that's really fun and just part of the mojo of vintage machines. But I also want to be able to, you know, play, pause in time, synced up with all my other instruments. So we're going to do both things today. So first up, to clean the trigger buttons, I have to open up the case and then disassemble the button assemblies and then clean the metal wire in the contacts to, you know, restore the connection. And to do that, I'm using this pen, which is a little brush that's actually made of fiberglass, but you twist it and it's got these fibers that actually are really rough to the touch. Not too unlike sandpaper, but it's not really gritty. It's just more of like a rough texture. But you use that to actually scrape the metal on the contacts to get rid of the oxidation that's on the outside. So let's crack into this and start the disassembly process. First up, you need to remove these fader caps from the top of the faders so the board that's underneath can pull out. So let's go ahead and do that. So now you need a Phillips head screwdriver to remove these two screws in the front to be able to lift the panel up. I've seen some units with thumb screws for these because people will go in and swap out the chips for the different sounds. That was a pretty popular thing to do, so they'd make it easier to access with thumb screws. But from the factory, they're normal screws. From here, we can open the top and access the internals. Obviously, at this point, I've actually already unplugged it, but you should make sure it's unplugged before you even start. Okay, now that it's all opened up and you have access to the guts of the machine, it's a good idea to go in with a can of compressed air and just kind of spray everything out. You'll probably do this a couple times as you work on this process. Just good to get any kind of dust or grime out of the machine, just to keep it in good shape. And then now you want to take out these nuts that are around the perimeter. So there are these little nuts on the edges and then across the top and bottom of the fader bank. And those are what are holding the board to the underside of the top here. And you want to do that while this is in this up and open position, because there are spacers underneath that if you do this at any other angle will fall out and you'll have to put them back and it's a whole thing. So it's good to just leave it upright like this. To get these nuts removed, you could use a crescent wrench type like this, or even a power driver with the right bit on it. Obviously, you want to be careful because there's some sensitive components in here. So, choose your own adventure there. But you can also use like a nut driver, which is just like a screwdriver with a socket bit on the end of it, and then that would work as well. And I went in and loosened all of these with the driver, but I'm going to take them the rest of the way off with my hands. Now that I've got all the nuts removed, let's lift the board out and access the top panel. It's on here a little tightly. Trying to kind of just loosen it from all sides evenly so don't put any unnecessary pressure on the board. Delicate process, but we got it. Okay, so I switched the angle back, but now you can see down here, the board is just resting on the secondary board that's on the bottom. And we don't want that, especially if we're powering it up and we want to test the buttons after we, make our corrections. We don't want anything to short out. So I just grabbed a shop towel that I'm going to use to separate the two. As you can see, these faders are extremely dusty. I'm surprised they actually still worked and I didn't have any issues with them, but I'm going to clean those up first thing. Even though it's gross, the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of go in and pick stuff out manually, just to not introduce anything extra that we don't need to cleaning-wise. Just to get rid of some of the bigger chunks. Again, I'm going to hit it with some compressed air. Kind of loosens things up a little bit. Moving all the faders down. Next, I'm using the absolutely just driest but damp paper towel, a really tough paper towel that's not going to rip or shred or leave like little nuggets in there. And I'm just going to wipe everything down a little bit. I've literally wrung all the water out of it, so it's barely damp. Next, I'm moving all the faders into the up position to access the lower bits. As you can tell as I was going through, there's a little bit of flex in the board. That's because it's just a kind of a flimsy thing. But it's also because I don't have any support here. So I'm going to put a little bit more underneath since I'm going to be working in this area and it'll be a little bit more sturdy. I'm pretty fortunate. It looks like there's no gunk or goo or anything that's spilled down through these keys. It's just dusty and collected, looks like pet hair or something over time. But for the most part, it's in pretty good shape. Now that these are dry, not that they were really ever wet to begin with, I'm going to use a tip from Paul J. White, who is an ex-Oberheim engineer who did a really extensive video on how to do this process. So if you're interested in that, you can find that also on YouTube. he recommends tape for the fader tracks. And how that works is you just pull a strip off, which I'm doing now, and you just kind of press it on and peel it off. I'm just going to see. This isn't the stickiest tape. That's why I went with the kind of scrub it route. But you can kind of tell it got some gunk off. It might be, I don't know, it may work pretty good, might not. Depends on what kind of shape your faders are in, I guess. But we're going to try it out. We're kind of getting it in the nooks and crannies there. Yeah, definitely picked up some. We get a fresh piece and keep at it for a bit. Oh yeah, see, that's a big piece. That was worth it. Okay, I think the faders are de-dusted and de-grimed enough to be okay. I don't want to go in there and do too much because I'm no expert on fader restoration, and I don't want to accidentally maybe go too far, get too deep in there and mess anything up. That was working fine because these faders weren't the issue. So, but while we're in there, figured it was a good maintenance thing. All right, now let's get to disassembling some buttons. Okay, so now for the trig buttons, you need to get in underneath each one of these keycaps to, access the switch. And to do that, you have to pop these key covers off. They're pretty much like keyboard, like typing keyboard type keys. That's sort of how they respond. I haven't been inside too many old school keyboard keys, but I have a feeling it was a very similar kind of architecture. It feels very similar anyway. So yeah, to get under these keycaps, you need some sort of prying tool. You could use a flathead screwdriver, or in my case, I'm going to use the back end of this little freebie, like IKEA type wrench, because it's wide enough that I think it'll fit under and kind of brace it enough to where it's not going to gouge into the keys. If you use something really narrow, it's putting a lot of pressure on one point, and the more you can spread that out across the width of the key, the less stress you're going to put that edge under. So in this case, because it's nearly as wide, I feel like it's a pretty good option. Okay, so let's go for it. So you want to pry between this top cap and the base plate. The base plate of the switch is attached to the board, and you don't want to start prying that up. So you kind of get underneath and just give it a little gentle pry. Go at it from both sides. And it'll snap and pop a little bit. And then, boom, you got your cover off and you have access to the switch. All right, so now we've got a close-up view of the guts of one of the keycaps, and you can see the whole mechanism. So how it works is this cross wire gets depressed when you press the keycap down, because this supporting round spring that's underneath gets pressed down, and that wire makes contact with another wire that crosses it. That is just a little bit too hard to see, but it's underneath this area. And when this angled wire makes contact with this one underneath here, that's when it triggers the sound. It completes that circuit. So what you want to clean is the bottom side of that wire and the top side of the other wire so that connection can be made. Okay, I'm using my iPhone flashlight to show you the little wire that's underneath that cross wire. Hopefully you can see that. But that's where this one makes contact with the one below. And the fact that it's as gray as it is means it's really oxidized, which is why it's having contact issues. Okay, so I've got my pen here that is going to basically work like sandpaper, but gentler, to kind of just rub off some of that oxidation. So let's give it a shot. Just on the top here to kind of show you how it works. So you can already see just in that area where I've made some contact, it's brighter. And that's exactly what the purpose of it is. It's to scrape off that oxidation and return the wire to its more raw state, which is what we need for it to make good contact. So I'm also going to go in and try to get that cross wire, which might be difficult. So here you can see how the wire moves. So as that presses down, it contacts that crossbar, and that's what triggers the sound. I'm kind of pressing it down and moving it to the side a little bit so I can access that bar. In the other video I saw, Paul recommends going in with the screwdriver directly on the little cross beam. So I'm going to do a little bit of that, as well as the underside. The fiber brush doesn't get in there as well as I'd like, so I think this method is kind of the go-to. Unless you could find a micro version of one of these, but it's just a little too beefy to get in there. I'm trying though. The thing is, most of the areas that this will hit will be the top, and we want what's in between the bottom of this underwire and that cross wire, so it just doesn't quite want to access it. This is a very small area. This screwdriver is really small. I mean, you can see next to my finger, it's very small in here. It's like surgery. Twisting seems to be a little bit better. But I can already see that that little underwire is brighter. So that means I'm definitely making good contact there. All right, I'm going to do this process with the rest of the buttons and get back to you. Okay, I had to turn the camera back on for this because check it out. Between this one and that one, you can see how that cross wire is almost completely black and you can't see underneath it. But then on this one, you can definitely see both wires. I don't know if it's bright enough, but big difference. Okay, so I've got this whole first row done now, and I was too excited to wait to finish all of them before I tried it out. So, moment of truth. Do the rub test. Not retriggering. No retriggers. No retriggers. Sweet. Now just 15 more to go. Another thing I want to mention is these keycaps. When they go back on, it's probably a good idea to support the board underneath where you're pressing because they do snap in pretty aggressively. But once they're in, they're really in. Another pro tip is to make sure that the holes line up before you start pressing it in because they are square. If you start trying to jam it in the wrong way, you won't know it from the front. That didn't happen to me, but I thought it might be good to mention because I definitely thought about it. Okay, so I've got them all back together again, and they all work great. No issues. Yeah. I decided to focus only on the ones after I got about halfway done, to only focus on the ones that had actual issues because I've learned some things along the way. And one of those is that you can actually make things a little bit worse if there's an issue. So one of them had a wire that was slightly bent, and I didn't realize that until after I had just cleaned the contact. I spent 20 minutes just on this one, the low tom, and it was because it had the tiniest little arc in that long wire. And after just cleaning the contacts, it still wasn't behaving, and it actually got worse. Like it ended up at one point where it wasn't even triggering, and I was like, what is going on? And then so I just tried, out of desperation, I just bent the wire a little bit down in the middle, and then there was no change. In fact, maybe it was even worse than it was. So I was like, okay, that's the opposite of what I need to do. So I went back in and then gently bent it back up. And I'm talking like the tiniest bit, like not even the width of this little mini screwdriver. And that was enough to make it start to behave properly again. And you couldn't really tell that it was bent unless you were really looking for it. So if you're having a problem child, then that's definitely something to look at. Okay, so now that the buttons are all fixed and the inside's all healthy, it's time to do the upgrade. And this is the kit that comes from a company called Electrongate, which, if you remember, I mentioned Paul J. White earlier and his YouTube videos on the Oberheim DX fixes and that kind of stuff. Well, there's also one on the install for this kit as well. And I'll link to both those videos in the description. But he's the founder of Electrongate. So he's the guy who actually makes this kit and will allow people like us to add MIDI to our DXs. But I thought I'd show what comes in the kit, so let's get it open. I think there's some tape down here. Yep. Okay, we got some protecting foil as well as your receipt. And then here we've got, looks like the board, the replacement OS chips, and the standoffs for the board to stand off from the other. I also opted for these pre-installed walnut end plates, which not only look really cool, but saves you the trouble from having to get any kind of sawzall out to drill holes in the existing sides. And these look really good, and this plate is metal and really high quality and screwed into place. These are, looks like they're etched in, no longer stickers, so really robust kind of look here, and everything's already wired up and ready to go. So yeah. These side panels are really easy to get off. All you have to do is use a Phillips head screwdriver and they should come right out. You're going to reuse these original screws and washers with the new panels. Also note that the MIDI panel goes on the right side, not on the left side. And just reverse of the removal. As just a general rule, when I'm working on anything, I always like to get things kind of finger tight first. Now we'll swap to the other side. Same deal, unscrew the panel. Wipe off any crud if there is any. I'm going to install this, but I'm going to leave the cables just kind of loose on the inside because we'll be able to address that when we open it up. And there we go. Okay, so now we've got the DX opened again. And as you can see, here are my wires for the MIDI panel in this side panel, accessible right here. And the first thing you want to do is locate the OS chips and this chip here. All three of these come out and get replaced with the chips that came in the kit. So here are the two OS chips that go in these two slots. And then this is the MIDI board that will, this will actually replace this chip and these two for there. So first you want to get these two chips out, which you can pry gently with a screwdriver underneath the main body of the chip and then not on the socket that it's in, and pry them up and just kind of work each side a little bit until it gets loose. And there we go. We got these two out here. First step, a little bit trickier than expected. So take your time, be careful. The first one I did popped right out, so you got to be careful. And now for this last big boy. Got it. And there's number 3. Okay, next you want to replace the OS chips with the new ones, being sure that the pins all line up nice and everything. And there's a little notch in the side here that aligns with these left sides, so you want to make sure that they go in the right way. That's with A being in the back one, B being in the one closest to you. It's critical to make sure all the pins line up exactly right and you don't force it in with anything misaligned. And also that the pins are all nice and straight. You want to make sure that it's nice and firmly seated. And I would definitely recommend looking behind kind of from all angles to make sure everything's nice and lined up, and it will kind of snap into place. Okay, those look good and like they're nicely seated in position without any pins sticking out or anything crazy. So the next step is to install the standoffs and the actual MIDI board, which involves actually removing these two screws from the main board where we're going to install standoffs to lift this secondary board, MIDI board, on top of everything here. So remove these and install these standoffs. And you're going to stack the small into the medium because some of these actually had some kind of board here for, I think it was the tape system for like backing up and everything. But in this instance, since I don't have that, then I'll have to use both of these standoffs together as one longer standoff. So these go, as you can see, right in the factory screw locations where I took these two out. Then we put the board in. There we go, nice and snug. Okay, so now I'm going to remove the little protective foam block from this last set of pins. And get this one plugged in. It seems to have gone right in, and I'm really suspicious, so I gotta check it out before I commit. I think we got it. Last but not least, we gotta hook up these little MIDI wiring harnesses to the board. The board's labeled, so we've got MIDI in over here, MIDI out over here, and just make sure you grab the right one. So this is MIDI out. Look at the pin orientation. There's a 2 and a 1. So you line those up. Slides right on. And MIDI in. All right, that should be everything. Let me get this thing closed back up, get the fader caps back on. These are still hanging out over here. And we'll see if we have MIDI and make sure everything works right. So there we are. I've got the fader caps back on and the screws put in because we have success. Everything works as it should. I did a little demo just to try it out. I've got the MIDI in going into the jack here, and I'm going to go ahead and play from the Octatrack. You can see the patterns going. When I stop it, it stops on the DX, and as you can see, it works exactly as you'd expect, which is super exciting. One quick thing that I forgot to share because I was too excited about getting all the goodies out and getting it all hooked up. It also comes with a printout of the original owner's manual, which is cool, as well as an installation guide document, which I got off the internet. And then also the sticker sheet, which labels all the functions, and you can put it under the buttons and on top there to label where all your options are and everything, but that's not something I'm interested in. I like keeping it looking original, and I'll just reference this when I need to. So yeah, look for this in my channel. I'm going to be using it for sure. Although it's really kind of big, so it's probably not going to end up on camera too much, especially in the top-down pedal demos because I have limited real estate there already. But very pumped to have this in the mix. And I hope you found the video useful, entertaining to some degree, as much as it can be. Also remember, links are in my description for this, for Electrongate for the MIDI upgrade kit, and as well as I'll link to the videos that Paul put together that I based a lot of my work today on. So couldn't have done it without him. Thank you so much. And this isn't sponsored. I paid for this full price, but worth every penny. All right, thanks so much for watching. Catch you next time.